pretty good at developing talent. So the question is, why are we here to talk about it? And I think the reason is one, it can't be static.
Moderating a discussion on how to improve officer development is challenging, particularly as the Army enjoys a solid reputation in this area. But the Army can't rest on its laurels in a world that changes so quickly. So in this session, my goal was to get participants thinking about how we can be more forward-looking in our talent development efforts. The Army leaders of 2030 and 2040 are entering the pipeline right now, and they won't be equal to the challenges of the future if our talent development methods remain static. The bottom line is strong professions have to continue to innovate in talent development.
You're not a profession just because you call yourself a profession. You're a profession because your client, in this case the people of the United States, consider you a profession. And one of the things a profession does or has is a commitment to education and to development. The problem is, in the context of the current demand, how do we continue our commitment to development? How do we ensure that we're developing our soldiers and our leaders, managing their talents, plural, for the betterment of both themselves and for the institution?
I think that this reoccurring deployment of our officers to combat with limited time in between for development, they're getting a lot of experience, but the educational underpinnings and the development of the core components of the officer corps, I think, are eroding. Some of the skills are eroding, some of the key components of what we've been about as an officer corps are degrading somewhat because of the repetitive assignments to combat. We are a nation at war. We are an army supporting that nation at war, and that's what's required right now. But now is a very important time to take stock in who we are, where we are, what are we doing, and determining how can we stop some of this erosion.
To be sure, our officer development model needs to be refined. There must be more tailored career paths that lead to promotion. Promotion boards need to recognize that due to an increasing need to specialize, key developmental assignments should be more diverse and more accepted. The current officer development model has become part of our Army culture. We all understand change will be hard, but if we are to remain the most relevant against an increasing array of threats to our nation, we must take on this challenge. Our officer corps and our nation deserves nothing less.
Today's current developmental structure is education, training, and experience. My current assessment is that education is undervalued because training is great if it's the right training, and experience is great if it's the right experience, and combat experience is searing. And what I tell all the majors at the Command and General Staff College is, you really have to concentrate here, because if you're not careful, 10 years from now, you'll be known as the Iraq guys who don't get it. Are we really willing to destroy some of our most hallowed policies, procedures, schools to create what we need for the future? Because when you see a lot of these problems here, they're not new. Some of these problems go all the way back to 1983 by the charts. And so you have to ask, why weren't they solved? Maybe it's because we have to destroy some of what we have to create the future.
The chance you cannot take is that as you're considering the restructuring of how we develop officers, that you leave out the moral component. Why? Because officership is inherently a moral occupation. What's the Army's plan for moral development? What's the Army's model of moral development? Where is it written? If you read Army doctrine today, it says character development is a responsibility of the individual, period, end of sentence. That says that the institution basically is backing up and saying, whoa, we don't have a big role in this. I would submit you can't afford to do that in the future. You can't afford to miss this. Moral efficacy. How do you accelerate the development of moral agency and moral efficacy? There are models out there about how you do that. People are studying this intensively. It's time to pull that expert knowledge into the Army and to incorporate it in our models of human development.
Everything here that we've spoken about, I think everybody would agree that we value all this. We value education. We value all the broadening experiences. But we're not necessarily rewarding those experiences, rewarding the individuals that take the risk to go out and do those experiences. And the signal to the force is very, very clear. We don't value education because we're picking up officers that have not completed school. So they hear that. The officers that work at the branch hear it, they see it, and then they reinforce it with their populations.
I think the term development in reference to the officer corps as we typically view it across the Army is really, we see it as leadership development. And that's why I think this discussion is very important. Our specialized expertise and training has to be recognized, has to be developed, and has to be encouraged. We can't let it be a constraint on advancement of the officer corps, as was alluded to. And does this require a cultural change? I think maybe it does. Dr. Snyder suggested culture can be very powerful, but it can also be very confining if we're not careful. And I think that's what's incumbent upon us, is to not let our culture be confining for our advancement here.
Couple of things. I really do appreciate Dr. Snyder keeping the fire burning on this issue of the profession and its ethos and the development of character, leaders of character. And we will take that on. I will confess to you that as we try to understand the challenges of leader development in an era of persistent conflict, there's still folks who, without admitting it, will say, it's really not persistent conflict. We just got to wait till we have more time, and then we'll be able to get back to the tried and true developmental models. I mean, I fight that on a daily basis. And my answer to that is, even if we could, we shouldn't, because of all the reasons we suggested here. There are more opportunities for doing things differently, and we really need to be open-minded to doing things differently.